to the new venture.
Cheers to that. I second that. Marvelous work, everyone.
The elevator doors had barely slid open before Diane Holloway saw it, and the smile that crossed her face was the kind that had nothing warm inside it. Maya Reyes was on her knees in the middle of the 14th floor hallway, her housekeeping cart pushed to the side, her dark hair tucked behind both ears, and her hands wrapped around a cloth that did not belong to her assigned supplies. Beside her, moving slowly with the careful deliberateness of a man whose knees had long since stopped cooperating with the rest of him, was the old janitor from the facility's crew. Walter, the one who had started 2 weeks ago, the one nobody really paid attention to because nobody really pays attention to the men who carry the mop buckets. He had been struggling with the near corner of the hallway, the spot where the marble tile met the baseboard in a tight angle that the industrial mop head couldn't reach without someone getting low enough to work it by hand. Maya had gotten low enough. Diane stepped out of the elevator with the 3 guests behind her. Mr. and Mrs. Calloway from the penthouse suite, and their daughter, a woman in her 30s who had the particular kind of posture that comes from being told since childhood that how you hold your body tells the room who you are. They were mid-sentence about the dinner reservation at 16, and the conversation should have continued, but Mrs. Calloway slowed just slightly when she registered the scene in the hallway, and her daughter made a small sound of amusement that she swallowed before it fully formed. Diane processed all of this in approximately 2 seconds. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything in this building, as a variable that either supported or threatened the version of the Hanes Grand Chicago that she was responsible for projecting to the world. A maid on her knees in a public hallway, scrubbing the floor beside the old man from facilities, in full view of guests who were paying $460 a night for a room that was not even their best room. She smiled at the Calloways and said something smooth about the light at this hour, how the late morning came through the north-facing windows in a way that made the whole corridor feel like a painting, and she turned them gently toward the elevator that would take them to the lobby and their car. When the doors closed, the smile stayed on her face for exactly 1 more second, and then it didn't. Maya heard the footsteps stop behind her before she heard anything else. She had been focused on the corner, on working the mineral crust out of the grout line with the edge of the cloth, because Walter had mentioned it twice, and she could see it was bothering him. Not in the way that professional pride bothers someone, but in the way that a man bothers who has been trying to do something right and cannot quite get there because his body will not let him. She had thought, it will take 4 minutes. She had 4 minutes before her next room. When she looked up, Diane was standing at the mouth of the hallway with her arms loose at her sides, which Maya had learned in the 7 months she had worked at the Hanes Grand was actually more dangerous than when Diane crossed them. "Finish up," Diane said. Not to Walter. To Maya. "Come find me when you're done with this floor." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Maya looked at Walter, who had gone still in the way that older men go still when they understand that they have become the periphery of a situation that started because of them. His eyes were steady, though, dark and steady, and watching Diane's retreating back with an expression Maya could not fully read. "You don't have to get in trouble for this," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that most problems benefit from a lower volume. "I'm not in trouble," Maya said. She finished the corner, rinsed the cloth in the bucket, and stood up, rolling her shoulders back. "That grout line's been like that for about 3 weeks, Walter said, looking at the corner with something that was almost satisfaction. "I've tried 4 different approaches." Maya looked at the grout line too, It was clean now. "The cloth has to be barely damp," she said. "If it's too wet, the solution just spreads the residue around instead of lifting it." Walter looked at her with a slight shift in expression. Not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. "You know the dilution ratio for this formula?" She named it. 1 part concentrate, 6 parts water. 1/4 part white vinegar for the calcium deposits that built up on the Chicago limestone tiles specifically because of the mineral content in the city water. It was not information that appeared in the Haynes Grand Training Manual, which called for the standard 2-to-1 ratio and produced results that were technically acceptable and practically insufficient for anyone who cared about the actual grout. Walter was quiet for a moment. "That's not what's on the label," he said. "The label's for general use," Maya said. "This floor is Bianco Carrara marble with original 1920s grout joints. The standard ratio lifts about 60% of the buildup. The adjusted ratio lifts about 90. He looked at her again, and this time the expression was different enough that she noticed it. It was the look of a man recalibrating something, not about the grout, but about the person describing it. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My mother had a thing about grout," Maya said. She picked up the mop bucket and started toward her cart. Walter watched her go. Then he looked at the clean corner of the hallway. Then he looked at the elevator, the one that had opened and closed and carried Diane Holloway and 3 guests who had watched a young woman kneeling on the floor like it was something to be mildly amused by. He rested both hands on the top of his mop handle and stood there for a moment, very still, in the way of a man who is not resting, but thinking. He had been doing this, coming to one of his hotels in the guise of a facilities worker, for 11 years. He had started after the 3rd expansion, when the portfolio had grown large enough that the numbers on the quarterly reports began to feel like the only real thing, and he had realized with something close to alarm that he no longer knew what it actually felt like to be inside one of these buildings. Not as a guest, not as an owner arriving for a ribbon cutting, but as the person who moves through the invisible parts of the building, the back corridors and the service elevators and the utility closets, the person whose presence is so expected that it becomes a kind of absence. What he learned in 11 years of this was that you could tell everything about a hotel from the way the people who were not being watched behaved toward each other. He had been at the Chicago property for 9 days. He had formed several opinions already. Most of them were not flattering. And then, 4 minutes ago, in a hallway on the 14th floor, a young woman with a cloth in her hand had knelt down beside him without being asked, and cleaned a grout line that had been bothering him for 3 weeks, and had known, without being told, exactly what formula to use and why. And that was a different kind of data point entirely. Maya knocked on Diane Holloway's office door at 11:47, which was 3 minutes after she had finished the last room on her assigned floor. She did not rush. She finished the room properly. The bathroom fixtures, the pillow arrangement, the small fold of the toilet paper that the Haynes Grand Training Manual specified, and that most guests never consciously registered, but that their nervous systems apparently did, because the satisfaction scores for room presentation were measurably higher in properties where the staff consistently performed it. She knew this because she had asked once, and the training coordinator had told her, and she had thought about it for a week. Diane's office was behind the housekeeping supply room on the basement level, a small room with no window and fluorescent lighting that had been flickering on the left side for as long as Maya had worked here. There was a metal desk, a computer, a corkboard with the weekly rotation schedule pinned to it in color-coded sections, and a small framed photo of Diane at what appeared to be a corporate awards ceremony. shaking hands with a man Maya did not recognize. "Close the door," Diane said. Maya closed it. Diane did not look up from her computer immediately. This was also something Maya had catalogued, the pause before the lookup, the way Diane structured small silences to remind you of the shape of the hierarchy you were both standing inside. Maya stood and waited and thought about the grout in the hallway and whether the solution would hold through the next cleaning cycle or whether the mineral deposits would rebuild in the same pattern. "The Callaways are in 1408 through Sunday," Diane said finally, turning to face her. "They are spending $11,000 for a 4-night stay, and they are the kind of guests who mention the hotel by name in their social media posts, which means every detail of their experience here is effectively a public event." She paused. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "You're telling me they saw me cleaning the floor," Maya said. "I'm telling you," Diane said, with the particular patience of someone who has decided to be patient as a way of being unkind, "that the image this hotel projects to its guests is not an accident. It is the result of every person in this building making consistent choices about how they appear and what they communicate about the standard of this property." She folded her hands on the desk. "You were kneeling on the floor of the 14th floor corridor with the facility's temp." "The corner hadn't been properly cleaned in 3 weeks," Maya said. "I had time. It needed doing." "That's not your job. Cleaning is my job." "Your job," Diane said, and her voice shifted just slightly, just enough, "is to follow the assigned rotation and maintain the standard procedures for the rooms on your floor. It is not to improvise. It is not to take on tasks outside your assignment. And it is absolutely not to do so in a way that is visible to guests in a manner that contradicts the presentation standard of this property." She let that sit for a breath. "We don't kneel on the floor in front of guests, Maya." Maya looked at her. She thought about several things she could say. She said none of them. "I'm adjusting your schedule," Diane said, turning back to her computer. "Starting tonight, you're on the basement-level rotation. Utility corridors, the spa service hallways, laundry facility. 4 nights, then we'll reassess." It was a punishment. They both knew it was a punishment. The basement rotation was the rotation you assigned someone when you wanted to make a point without having to put anything formally in writing. "Okay," Maya said. "That's all." Maya opened the door and went back to the supply room to finish logging her room completions. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was tight in a way that she had learned, over many years, to make look like nothing at all. There was a version of Maya Reyes that had existed before the Haynes Grand, before the Meridian, before the years of service elevators and supply closets, and the particular exhaustion that settles into the body, not from the physical labor itself, but from the sustained effort of doing excellent work inside institutions that reward the appearance of excellence more reliably than its substance. That version had been 22 years old and had walked into her first hotel job with the methodical preparedness of someone trained by the most rigorous person she knew. Her mother, Elena Reyes, had cleaned since she was 19 and had opinions about surface chemistry and tool selection that would not have been out of place in a professional consultancy, had such a career been available to her at the time and in the place where she lived. Elena had taught Maya how to read a surface. Not just what product to use on which material, though that too catalogued with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the difference between a cloth that was too wet and one that was exactly right was the difference between a surface that looked clean and one that was clean. She had taught her how to look at a room when you first entered it and understand, from the arrangement of things and the particular quality of the light and the way the dust had settled, what had happened there and what it needed. She had taught her something else, too, less formal and more durable. The habit of stopping. Of not moving past a thing that needed doing simply because the thing was not on your list. It was not a philosophy she had articulated. It was a practice, observed over 20 years of watching her mother work, absorbed into the body before it was ever understood by the mind. On the morning she had turned the corner of the 14th floor and found Walter struggling with that mop head, Maya had not thought about this. She had seen a problem she could solve in 4 minutes and had solved it. That was the whole arithmetic of it. It had not felt like a choice so much as a reflex, the kind that only becomes visible in retrospect, when you look back at the moment and see that there had, in fact, been a fork, and you had taken one path without noticing there was another. She finished her log, signed out, and walked to the service elevator. On the 14th floor, in the corner where the marble met the baseboard, the grout was clean. The building did not mark the occasion. It simply continued, as buildings do, carrying everything that had happened inside it with the impartial permanence of structure, waiting, as always, for someone to ask the right questions. The basement of the Haynes Grand Chateau was not a single space. It was a system, a network of corridors and utility rooms and mechanical chambers that had been added to and subdivided and rerouted across the building's 94-year history, until what remained was something like a map drawn by multiple people who had never fully agreed on what they were mapping. There was the laundry facility, which ran 20 hours a day and smelled of detergent and sustained heat. There were the mechanical rooms, where the building's HVAC systems and water infrastructure lived in a state of organized complexity that required a specialist to read and a generalist to maintain between specialist visits. There were the supply staging areas, where the bulk housekeeping inventory arrived by freight and was redistributed upward through the service elevators. And there were the spa service corridors, which connected the main spa on the basement level to the fitness center and the back-of-house support areas, and which needed to be maintained to a guest-adjacent standard, even though guests rarely saw them directly. Maya was assigned to all of it. She started her first basement shift at 10 at night and finished at 6 in the morning, and by the time she rode the service elevator back up to the locker room, she had walked approximately 4.5 miles inside a building whose lobby was 40 feet from Michigan Avenue. She did the work correctly. She did it the way she did everything, with the particular thoroughness that her mother had modeled, and that Maya had long since stopped thinking of as anything other than simply how things were done. She did not complain to anyone. She did not ask for reassignment. She logged her hours, signed out, and went home to her apartment in Pilsen, where she slept until 2 in the afternoon, and then lay awake for a while looking at the ceiling. On the second night, she found Walter in the mechanical room. He was standing in front of a large pressure gauge on the building's primary water heating system, holding a small notepad and writing in it with the concentration of a man who was either genuinely interested in what the gauge was telling him or had learned to look interested in things as a way of remaining invisible. He wore the same gray uniform that all the facilities workers wore, and his white hair was slightly flattened on one side in the way of someone who had been leaning their head against something for a while. "They sent you down here, too?" Maya asked, setting her supply cart against the wall. "I volunteered," Walter said, without looking up from the gauge. "I like the mechanical rooms. Most people don't. Makes it quiet." Maya looked around. The room was warm, the way these rooms always were, and it smelled of metal and hydraulic fluid and, underneath that, the faint mineral smell of Chicago water that seemed to work its way into every corner of every building in the city, regardless of what you did to stop it. The pressure gauge Walter was watching had a small red needle that sat about 15 degrees past the midpoint of its range. "Is that reading correct?" she asked. Walter looked at her. "You know how to read a hydronic pressure gauge?" "My building super showed me when I was 12, she said. "I used to go with him on his rounds after school. He said a curious kid was better than a bored one." Walter looked back at the gauge. "It's slightly elevated, about 8 psi above where it should be for this time of night. Could be the expansion tank losing its precharge. Could be the pressure-reducing valve cycling wrong." He made a note in his pad. "I've been watching it for 3 nights." "3 nights?" Maya said. "You've been coming down here 3 nights." "Different levels," he said. "But I try to get to the mechanicals every other night. These old buildings, the infrastructure tells you things. You just have to be paying attention." Maya started on the spa corridor, which needed mopping, and then a check of the supply closets for the morning linen staging. She worked through the first section and came back through the mechanical room 20 minutes later to refill her bucket. And Walter was still there, though now he was sitting on an overturned utility crate with half a turkey sandwich from a paper bag. "You want the other half?" he said, holding it out. "I have my own dinner," she said. But she sat on the edge of a second crate, because her feet had already put in 10 hours that day, and she had 4 more to go. And the crate was there, and Walter was a man who made silence feel comfortable, rather than loaded. They ate. The pressure gauge ticked faintly. The laundry machines 3 rooms over rumbled at their steady industrial frequency, a sound like a long, slow exhale that never quite finished. "How long have you been at this hotel?" Walter asked. 7 months. "And before?" "The Meridian on Wacker, 2 years. And before that, the Sheraton near O'Hare, 18 months. And before that, I did private residential cleaning, which I liked because the work was more varied, but I got tired of the isolation." She paused. "Why?" "I'm curious about the building," he said. "From where you sit. What it's actually like." Maya thought about this. It was not the question she expected. Most people, when they asked about her work, were really asking a polite version of something else. "Are you okay? How do you manage? Don't you want something better?" Walter seemed to be asking what she actually saw. "It's a beautiful building," she said. "The bones of it. The Carrara marble on 12 through 14. The crown molding in the event corridor on 3, which you can barely see in the lighting they've got now, but if you get a flashlight on it, it's extraordinary. This building was built in 1931, and somebody cared about the details in a way that people just don't anymore." She picked at the edge of her sandwich. "The management systems are a different story. The supply chain for replacement linens is backed up 4 to 6 weeks, which means we're overwashing the current inventory, and it's wearing down faster than it should. There are 6 rooms on 11 with shower fixtures that have degraded seals. The water pressure varies enough that guests probably notice, but it's been on the maintenance request list for 2 months. And the housekeeping rotation is built around optics instead of actual cleaning cycles, which means some areas look clean at inspection and aren't, and some areas that need more time get the same time as everything else." Walter had stopped eating. "The grout on 14, he said. "That's one example." He was quiet for a moment. "And the staff?" Maya chose her words carefully. "The people who clean this building are mostly good at what they do," she said. "The people who manage the people who clean this building are variable." "Variable?" Walter said. "Some of them understand that the work matters," she said. "Some of them understand that the appearance of the work mattering is what matters. Those are not the same thing." Walter looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "They're not." "Can I ask you something?" Maya said. "You can ask." "The other day, on the 14th floor, you mentioned the dilution ratio before I did. You knew the specific chemical compound, not the brand name. That's not in any facilities training materials I've seen." She looked at him evenly. "And tonight, you're monitoring a hydronic pressure gauge and taking structured notes. That's not something a general facilities temp does." She paused. "I'm not asking to be rude. I'm curious." Walter was quiet for a long moment. He folded the top of his paper bag with the neatness of someone who intended to throw it away, but wanted to do it tidily. "I spent a long time in this industry," he said, "before my current situation. Old habits. What did you do before?" "I built things," he said simply. "Then I managed things. Then I got tired of managing things from a distance and started doing this instead." He gestured at the mechanical room. "I find it more honest." It was not a full answer, and they both knew it. And Maya did not push further, because she recognized the shape of information a person was offering as much of as they were going to offer. She had learned, from years of working in spaces where people left things behind, that what someone chose not to say was often as legible as what they said, if you knew how to read the gap. "The housekeeping supply contract," Walter said after a moment. "The one for the cleaning concentrates. Do you know if it went through a vendor comparison process, or if it was a direct contract?" Maya frowned. "I don't know. Department management, I assume." "Why?" "Just a thought," he said. "The concentrates you're using now, do you know when they changed?" "About 3 months ago," she said. "It switched from Pure Stone Professional to Clear Line Industrial. I noticed because the formulas behave differently on the stone flooring. The Clear Line is cheaper per unit, but you need more of it per application, so the effective cost savings are smaller than they look, and the results on the Carrara are measurably worse." "Measurably," Walter said, in the tone of a man for whom measurement was not an abstraction. "I can see the difference in the grout," she said, "and I've tracked my solution usage per room since the switch. I'm using about 30% more product per cycle to achieve the same surface result, which means, on a per-room basis, the cost difference between the old contract and the new one is closer than the unit price suggests." Walter looked at her for a long moment. In the middle distance, the pressure gauge needle ticked. "You track your solution usage per room," he said. "I track most things," Maya said. "It helps me understand what's actually happening versus what the standard process assumes is happening." He made a note in his pad. She did not ask what he wrote. Maya's radio crackled, a routine check-in from the overnight desk, and she stood up and went back to her cart. She worked the rest of the spa corridor, the supply closets, the freight staging area, and came back through the mechanical room at 2:15 to find it empty. Walter's utility crate pushed neatly against the wall, the pressure gauge still ticking its 8-degree deviation into the night. On her way through the laundry facility, she found Carmen, a woman who had worked the overnight laundry at the Haynes Grand for 11 years, and who knew the institutional life of the building the way deep-root trees know soil. Not through analysis, but through the long accumulation of contact. "You hear about Paulette?" Carmen said, not looking up from her folding. "What about her?" "She's gone. Last week. HR told her she was being let go for consistent performance issues." Carmen made the quotation marks with her free hand. She'd been here 4 years. No written warnings, no formal performance reviews on record. Just gone. Maya was quiet. The laundry machine behind Carmen completed its cycle and began its second spin. Diane didn't like her, Carmen continued. Paulette started speaking up in team meetings, asking about the supply schedule, why the replacement linens were always backed up, whether anyone had reviewed the vendor contract. Specific questions. Questions with numbers in them. She smoothed a pillowcase flat against the folding table. 2 weeks after she started asking, she was gone. Carmen, Maya said, the cleaning supply contract, the switch to Clearline. Do you know who negotiated it? Carmen looked at her fully for the first time. She had the steady gaze of someone who has spent years in a room full of heat and noise and learned to conserve her attention for things that merited it. Diane did, she said. Direct contract, no bidding process. Same company she used at her last property before she came here. The laundry room was warm and loud and smelled of detergent, and Maya stood in it at 2:20 in the morning with her hand on her cart and felt something settle into place in her mind. Not a complete picture, but its outline. The shape of a coastline visible through fog before the fog lifts. The particular geometry of a problem that has been present all along, waiting for the observer to stand in the right position. She thought about Walter asking about the vendor contract before she had thought to make the connection herself. She thought about him asking in the careful, neutral voice of a man who already knew the contours of the answer. She went back to work. She cleaned the freight staging area and the east utility corridor and the service bathroom on the sub-level, and she did it all correctly and thoroughly, because the work was the work regardless of what else was happening around it, and she had never once found it useful to do the work badly, just because the institution containing it was imperfect. By the time her shift ended and she rode the service elevator up through the sleeping building, she had added several items to the inventory she kept in the back of her mind. The part of her attention she used like a drawer, collecting the things that did not yet fit anywhere obvious, but that she was not ready to discard. She was beginning to think the drawer was getting full. The disciplinary file appeared on a Thursday. Maya found out about it the way you find out about most things when you work in a large hotel, not through official communication, not through the person who initiated it, but through the particular kind of sympathetic warning that comes from someone who works adjacent to the machinery of these decisions and feels bad about staying completely silent. It was Deshawn, one of the front desk supervisors, a man who had worked at the Haynes Grand for 3 years and who had the quality, rare in institutions, of being genuinely decent without making a performance of it. He found Maya at the service elevator at the start of her 4th basement shift and said, quietly and without preamble, that there was a file in HR with her name on it. The file contained a report about missing amenities from a room on the 15th floor. Amenity bottles, the small glass containers of the Haynes Grand branded toiletries that cost $14 each retail, and that guests occasionally walked off with, and that staff occasionally, according to the file, also walked off with. I didn't take anything, Maya said. I know, Deshawn said. I'm just telling you it's there. See, she thanked him, and he went back to the lobby and she stood at the service elevator and thought clearly about what she was dealing with. She had not taken anything. She knew this with the clean certainty of a person who has never taken anything. But she also knew that the absence of having done a thing does not, by itself, constitute a defense against being accused of it, particularly when the person making the accusation controls your documentation, your scheduling, and the narrative of your professional performance in the only record that matters here. She knew 2 things clearly. First, she needed her own record of the rooms in question. Second, she needed to talk to someone. The options were limited, because the options always are when the person you need to talk about is also the person who controls most of the relevant information. She had colleagues, but colleagues in this building had learned the calculus of association. Standing close to a problem made you part of it, and nobody wanted to be part of this particular problem. She had Carmen, who was an institutional memory, but not an ally in any formal sense. She had Deshawn, who had already done more than his position required by warning her. And she had Walter. She found him at 6 in the morning, at the end of her shift, in the freight staging area where he sometimes sat, on a pallet of supply boxes before the day shift started. She had not planned to come there. She came there anyway, because planning and instinct are different navigational systems, and sometimes one knows things the other doesn't. He looked at her when she came in, and whatever he saw in her face made him pour a second cup from his thermos, without being asked, and set it on the pallet beside him. She told him about the file. She told him about Paulette. She told him what Carmen had said about the vendor contract, the direct negotiation, the same company from the previous property, the timeline that lined up with Paulette's departure. She laid it out plainly, the way she laid out everything, without drama, without self-pity, just the sequence of events in their actual order, which was bad enough on its own without embellishment. Walter listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer immediate reassurances or reflexive solutions. He listened the way someone listens when they understand that listening, done properly, is itself a significant thing to offer. When she finished, he held his coffee cup in both hands and looked at the far wall of the staging area for a moment. A wall of industrial shelving stacked with supply boxes, each one labeled in the neat block letters of the overnight staging team. "Do you have your room logs?" he asked. "I have copies," she said. "I photograph them before I turn in the originals." "I started doing that at my second hotel because I had a situation there where a log went missing and I had nothing to show for it." She paused. "I know it sounds paranoid." "It sounds practical," he said. "The logs show entry and exit times for each room. Entry time, exit time, task completion checklist, and any noted issues in the room's condition at entry, including the initial amenity status. I always note what was present when I went in case something's already missing from the guest's own use. That way, it can't come back as my responsibility." She wrapped both hands around the paper cup. "My mother taught me to do that. She said the work protects you, but only if you protect the record of it." For a moment, something moved across Walter's face. Not quite a smile, but the predecessor of one, the shadow that comes before the light. "Your mother sounds like someone worth knowing," he said. "She cleaned for 30 years, Maya said. She knew things about this work that most people who run hotels don't know and wouldn't think to ask about." They sat with that for a moment. Outside the staging area, the building was beginning its morning sounds. The freight elevator, the distant shift of the laundry entering its daytime cycle, the ventilation system changing over its overnight configuration to the heavier demand of morning. The building was, as always, going about its business. "The supply contract," Walter said, "the clear line vendor. When you described the pricing, the number you remembered from the invoice you saw through the supply closet window, can you say it again?" She told him the number. She had a specific memory for numbers, the kind her mother had called a gift, and her high school math teacher had called an obligation, and she had been noting numbers she encountered in the course of her work for as long as she had been working, the way other people note names or faces. Walter held his coffee and was quiet for long enough that the freight elevator went up and came back down again. "Maya," he said finally, "what they're going to do with that file is schedule a formal review, probably with HR and your department manager, possibly with the general manager if they want the proceeding to carry weight." He turned the cup in his hands. "When that happens, Bring your logs, your photographs, and the amenity condition notes for the specific rooms cited. Present them plainly, without anger, without defensiveness. Let the documentation speak first. And if they've already made the decision before I walk into the room, then the documentation is still what you have, he said. And it's not nothing. Documentation is the form the building's memory takes. It's the only version of events that can stand up in a room where everything else is people's accounts against each other. He paused. Don't let them reframe what happened. They're going to try to make the story about your character. The story is actually about your logs. Keep the conversation there. And if it doesn't matter, she said, if the decision's already been made, and the process is just going through the motions? Walter looked at her. Then you will have done the right thing cleanly, he said, and that is not nothing. And, he paused, choosing the next words with a care she registered but could not quite account for. Other things may happen. You don't always know who's in the room. It was a strange thing to say. Not untrue, not cryptic exactly. More like a statement that contained more weight than its surface suggested. A sentence that would have meant something different said by someone else in a different register. She thought about it on the service elevator going up. She thought about it walking home through the early Chicago morning, the April wind off Lake Michigan finding every gap in her jacket collar with its cold, patient precision. She thought about the way Walter had asked about the vendor contract before she had known to ask about it herself. She thought about a man who knew the chemical compound name for a cleaning solution and could read a hydronic pressure gauge and spoke about building maintenance protocols in the past tense, as though he had once been the person who set them. She thought about the fact that in 9 days in this building, she was apparently the only person who had stopped and knelt down beside him in a hallway. She was not a person who believed in grand coincidences or dramatic revelations. She was a person who believed in documentation and observation and the slow accumulation of things that fit together into patterns, and the pattern she was building in the back of her mind was not yet complete, but it had a shape, and the shape was becoming more specific by the day. She fell asleep before she completed the thought, and in the morning the notification was in her email. Formal review. The following day, 10 o'clock, conference room B on the 2nd floor. She replied that she would be there. She spent the rest of that day organizing her folder, printed logs, photographs with embedded metadata timestamps, amenity condition notes cross-referenced by room number and date. She arranged them chronologically, tabbed the relevant entries, wrote nothing extra on them because the information spoke without assistance from her. She had learned from her mother that the most persuasive document was the one that required no interpretation, the one that simply contained, with precision and completeness, the record of what had actually happened. She did not sleep well that night, but she had not expected to. Conference Room B on the 2nd floor of the Haynes Grand Chicago was used for small vendor meetings and internal reviews, and occasionally for the kind of conversation that both parties understood was not really a conversation, but needed to look like one. It had a rectangular table, 6 chairs, a wall-mounted screen, and a window that looked not outward, but into the hotel's interior atrium. A shaft of marble and glass that rose 11 stories, and let in a column of filtered light that moved across the conference room floor in the late morning like the hour hand of a very slow clock. Maya arrived at 9:58. She had her folder, printed logs, photographs, amenity condition notes, organized in chronological order with the relevant entries tabbed. And she had slept 6 hours and eaten breakfast, because she understood from experience that the body's state affects the mind's performance, and she needed her mind to perform today. Diane was already there, seated to the left of the head of the table, with a folder of her own that was thicker than it should have been for a review this early in any formal process. Beside Diane was Patricia Huang, the HR manager, who had the carefully neutral expression of someone who has attended enough of these meetings to have learned that neutrality is the only sustainable position. At the head of the table sat Gregory Weston, the general manager of the Haynes Grand Chicago, a tall man in his early 50s with the particular variety of confidence that comes from having been told for a long time by a sufficient number of people that his instincts were correct. Weston gestured to the chair across from Diane. Maya sat. "Thank you for coming in," Weston said, the kind of phrase you use when the alternative was never actually available. "We want to walk through some concerns that have been raised and give you an opportunity to respond." Diane opened her folder. She had the report printed on hotel letterhead, a formal document already part of Maya's official file. It cited 3 incidents: the 15th floor amenity discrepancy, a notation about Maya performing work outside her assigned rotation on the 14th floor, and a general assessment of conduct inconsistent with the professional standards of the Haynes Grand. That last one was the most dangerous because it was the least specific, which meant it was the hardest to refute with facts. A vague charge is a flexible charge, and flexible charges are designed to survive whatever documentation you bring in to counter them. "The amenity report," Patricia said. "Do you have anything you'd like to share?" "I have my room logs," Maya said, "for each of the rooms cited. I have entry time, exit time, and amenity status at entry, which I photograph and log as a standard practice." She placed the relevant pages on the table, turned so they could read them. "In each case, the amenity count at my entry was already reduced. Guests had used items before I cleaned the room. I documented the initial count, which shows the discrepancy existed before I began cleaning." Patricia looked at the pages. Diane looked at them with controlled patience. "These are your personal copies," Diane said, "not the official hotel logs." "The official hotel logs contain the same information," Maya said. "These are photographs of the forms before I submitted the originals. The timestamps on the photographs are embedded in the file metadata." A brief silence. Patricia made a note. "The incident on the 14th floor," Weston said. "The cleaning activity outside your assignment. I assisted a facilities worker with a maintenance task during a gap in my scheduled rotation," Maya said. "The task took 4 minutes, and I completed my assigned rooms within standard time." "The concern," Diane said, is about presentation, about the image this hotel." The door opened. It opened the way doors open when someone has not knocked, all at once, without the preliminary hesitation of a pause. And Walter came in wearing his gray facilities uniform with a small notepad in his breast pocket and moved to sit in one of the empty chairs at the far end of the table, with the unhurried ease of a man who had sat in many rooms and found most of them manageable. Diane turned. "This room is in use," she said. "I can see that," Walter said pleasantly. "Facilities reviews are not conducted in Conference Room B," Diane said, her voice sharpening into a patience that was edging toward its limit. "If you need to speak with someone in the facilities department—" "I'm fine here," Walter said. He looked at Maya. He looked at the papers on the table. He looked at Diane's folder with its hotel letterhead. He looked, for a moment, at the window and the atrium light crossing the floor. "Sir," Diane said, and now the patience was gone entirely, replaced by the blunt authority of someone who has decided that pleasantness is no longer efficient. "This is a private HR review. I need to ask you to leave." Maya opened her mouth. She had not planned what came out of it, which was possibly why it came out at all. because plans, she had found, were sometimes the thing standing between you and the truth you already knew. "He can stay," she said. Everyone looked at her. "He's been in this building for 2 weeks," Maya said, and her voice was steady in a way that surprised her only slightly. "And in that time he is the only person in this building who has spoken to me as though my work matters. I would like him to stay." She looked at Diane. "And I would like to talk about the Clearline industrial contract." The temperature in the room changed. It was not a dramatic change. No voices rose, no one stood, but it was legible, the way a drop in barometric pressure is legible in the body before the storm makes itself visible. Patricia's pen stilled against her notepad. Weston's jaw tightened by a fraction. Diane's expression went through several things quickly, like a hand of cards being rearranged. "That contract has no relevance to this review," Diane said. "The contract replaced Pure Stone Professional approximately 3 months ago," Maya said, keeping her voice even, keeping her eyes on the table rather than on Diane, because she had learned that looking directly at someone you are confronting gives them something to react to, and she did not want to give Diane anything to react to yet. "It's a direct contract. No vendor comparison process. No bidding. The unit cost is lower, but the effective cost per cleaning application is comparable because a higher volume of product is required per surface to achieve the same result. On the stone flooring specifically, the differential is approximately 30% more product per cycle." She paused. "The vendor is the same company used at the last property where the head of housekeeping was employed before joining this hotel. And the pricing on the contract." She named the figure she had memorized from the invoice she had seen through the supply closet window, "is substantially above industry benchmark for comparable product lines." The silence this time was a different quality entirely. Not the silence of a room processing a challenge, but the silence of a room in which something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and everyone is deciding simultaneously and independently what to do with that fact. Diane's face had passed through controlled patience and emerged somewhere harder and more exposed. She looked at Maya with the look of a person who has just had the ground shift under a structure she had spent considerable time building. "Where did you get those numbers?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I observed them," Maya said simply. "I have a specific memory for numbers." The invoice was visible through the supply closet window on B2 during an overnight shift. "The closet door was unlocked, not by me. I was staging supplies and the door was ajar." "You're saying you were looking through?" Gregory Weston's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed in a way that was too subtle to name, but too significant to miss. The expression of a man who has just received information that reorganizes the room he is sitting in. Patricia Huang's phone buzzed. She looked at hers and looked up, and for the first time in the meeting, her carefully neutral face became something else, attentive in a direction she had not been attentive before. On the conference room screen, not a scheduled presentation, not anything anyone had initiated, a building-wide administrative notification appeared, the kind that goes to department heads and senior management simultaneously, triggered from the ownership level. It showed a name. It showed a title. Walter Haynes, founder and owner, Haynes Grand Hotels, LLC. The room went still in the specific way that rooms go still when the information available to everyone in it has been entirely replaced by a different set of information. Gregory Weston stood up. He stood with the particular immediacy of a man whose body has understood something before his mind has finished processing it. The way you flinch before you hear the sound. Patricia stood. Two junior staff members who had been sitting quietly near the wall stood. Walter did not move from his chair. He sat with the same quality of stillness he had brought to the mechanical room and the freight staging area and the 14th floor hallway. The stillness of a man for whom the room's reaction to him is information, not performance. He looked at Diane Holloway, and his expression was not angry. Maya would remember this afterward, how it was not angry. It was precise. It was the expression of someone who has been watching something for 9 days and has now seen enough. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, and his voice was the same unhurried voice from every conversation in every corner of this building. "Set aside the file on Ms. Reyes. We're going to table that entirely." He looked at her folder, still open on the table. "I'd like to talk about the Clearline contract." Diane Holloway's face was a color that had no clean name for it. Not white, not gray, but the specific shade of a person whose plan for the next hour has just been replaced by a completely different hour. One she had not prepared for and could not now avoid. Maya sat at the table with her folder in front of her and looked at the old man at the far end. The man from the 14th floor hallway. The man with the thermos in the freight staging area. The man who had sat on an overturned utility crate at 2 in the morning and listened to her talk about grout and her mother and the things this building was and was not, and felt the room reorganize itself around a fact she had not known but had, in some back corridor of her attention, been half approaching for days. She did not speak. She sat with it. The atrium light moved at another half-inch across the conference room floor, indifferent and steady, keeping its own time. Diane Holloway did not go quietly. In this, at least, she was consistent. She had never done anything quietly when loudness, or its more dangerous cousin, controlled persistence, was available as an alternative. She started with denial. The contract, she said, had gone through the standard process. There had been a cost-benefit analysis. The decision had been made collectively, and she used that word with the specific emphasis of someone trying to redistribute a weight she could feel settling on her alone. She looked at Gregory Weston when she said it, and Weston looked at the table. "I'd like to see the cost-benefit analysis," Walter said. He had not changed his tone since the room rearranged itself around his identity. This was, Maya was beginning to understand more fully, simply how he operated. At the same register, at the same pace, regardless of what the room was doing around him. The vendor comparison documentation, the pricing matrix, the approval chain. "I can have that pulled together," Diane said. "It'll take some time to locate the—" "I'd like to see it now," Walter said. "James." He looked toward the door, and Maya realized there was a man standing in the corridor who had not been there 5 minutes ago. A man in a dark suit with a laptop bag, who had apparently materialized during the last few minutes in the way that people who work closely with hotel owners apparently do. "Can you pull the procurement records for housekeeping supply contracts last 18 months? James sat at the empty chair by the door and opened his laptop with the efficiency of someone who had done this before in other rooms, in other hotels, and knew exactly where to look and what he was looking for. Diane looked at James and the laptop. She looked at Walter. The calculation happening behind her eyes was visible in the way a calculation becomes visible when the person doing it has run out of time to conceal it. She was looking for the angle, the reframe, the narrative that placed her somewhere adjacent to the problem rather than at its center. She found one, or thought she did. "Maya came to me several weeks ago," Diane said, turning to Patricia with the pivot of someone redirecting a conversation onto safer ground, and raised questions about the supply contracts, questions that raised concerns about how she had obtained proprietary department-level information. She paused, letting that land. I believe she may have accessed documents that she should not have had access to. The supply closet on B2 was improperly secured during a period of the overnight rotation, and I believe the closet door was unlocked, Maya said. She said it calmly, without force, because force was not what this moment required. I was staging supplies for the overnight rotation. The closet door was ajar. The invoice was visible from where I was standing. I did not open the door. I did not touch the file. I read a number that was in my line of sight, and I remembered it, because I have a specific memory for numbers. She looked at Diane directly for the first time in the meeting. I did not go looking for it. I saw it the way you see something that is simply in front of you. You can't verify that, Diane said. I can verify the timeline, Maya said. My overnight log shows the staging sequence for that shift. The timestamp on the B2 supply closet entry is consistent with the standard staging order for the rotation. I was where I was supposed to be, doing what I was supposed to be doing. At the time the invoice was visible. She paused. Carmen can confirm the closet was improperly secured that week. She noted it in the laundry facility log because supplies from B2 were being borrowed for the laundry staging, and the door situation was creating a workflow problem. Diane opened her mouth and closed it. James looked up from his laptop. Mr. Haynes. He turned the screen slightly toward Walter. Procurement records for Clearline Industrial, 18 months. Walter looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long moment with no expression at all, the way someone looks at a thing they have been expecting to find and find no satisfaction in having found. Then he looked at Diane. The Clearline contract is priced at 42% above the industry benchmark for comparable product lines, he said. The previous Pure Stone contract was at 8% below benchmark. He set his hands flat on the table, a gesture that was neither aggressive nor performative, simply the gesture of a man settling something. The annual differential on this property's volume is approximately $68,000. The number sat in the room like something dropped from a height. And the vendor, Walter continued. Clearline Industrial is registered to a holding company in Delaware. That holding company lists a secondary stakeholder. He looked at Diane steadily. I'd like you to explain that relationship. Diane's mouth was open slightly. She closed it. She opened it again. The particular quality of her silence was the silence of a person who has spent considerable professional energy managing information and has just found that the information has been managed around her. I want to speak with legal counsel, she said. Before I say anything else, I want legal counsel present. That's completely within your rights, Walter said, without inflection. Patricia will walk you through the process. He looked at Patricia. Can you take this from here? Of course, Patricia said, and her voice had changed. The neutrality was still there, but it had acquired a different texture. The texture of someone who is now neutral in the service of a specific outcome rather than a procedural one. What followed was not a single dramatic moment. Diane moved from insistence to demands for legal representation to a deflating silence that was its own kind of statement. Gregory Weston sat with the expression of a man recalculating everything he had understood about the last 18 months and arriving at sums that were not in his favor. 2 phone calls were made from the corridor. James continued working on his laptop. Patricia worked her phone. The building continued around them, the elevators moving, the lobby receiving its morning traffic. the marble being walked on, and the fixtures being used, and the whole ongoing machine of hospitality proceeding as it always did, indifferent to the small human reckonings happening in Conference Room B. Diane left at 10:54. She left with Patricia and with an HR administrator Maya had not seen before, and she did not look at Maya on her way out. She looked at the floor, and then at the door, and then she was gone, and the room settled into a quieter shape. Weston looked at Walter with the expression of a man who has several things to say, and has correctly identified that none of them are adequate to the situation. "I owe you a fuller accounting of the last quarter," Weston said. "You do," Walter agreed. "We can do that this afternoon." He looked at James, who nodded and made a note. Then Walter looked at Maya, and the room changed again. Smaller this time, quieter. "I'd like to talk with you about something else," he said. "Can you stay a few more minutes?" Weston took this as his cue and left, and James moved to the corridor, and the conference room held for a moment 3 people: Walter, Maya, and the atrium light, which had progressed steadily across the floor and was now touching the edge of the table in a thin line of gold. "I'm going to be direct," Walter said, "because I think that's what you prefer, and because I've been in enough indirect conversations in the last 9 days to last me some time." He folded his hands on the table. "I'm removing Gregory Weston from this property. Not solely because of this situation, but because this situation is symptomatic of a management culture here that has been performing quality rather than producing it, and he's been either causing that or permitting it long enough that the distinction no longer matters." He paused. "I need an interim director of housekeeping operations while I conduct a full departmental review. Someone who understands this building from the inside. The actual inside, not the org chart version." Maya was quiet. "I know your work history is at the staff level," Walter said. "I also know that you understand this building's infrastructure better than anyone I've spoken to in 9 days, including the people paid to know it. I know your documentation practices exceed what the management manual requires. And I know, which matters more than any of the above, that you help people who need it when no one you consider important is watching." He said this plainly, without sentiment or ceremony. "I'd like to offer you the interim role, formal title, appropriate compensation, a 3-month review at quarter's end." The atrium light held its position on the table. Outside, the city went about its business. Michigan Avenue, the lake, the April wind that had not yet decided whether to warm or stay cold. Maya looked at her folder, still open in front of her, and at the tabs she had made, and the timestamps she had kept, and the amenity counts she had logged in rooms she had cleaned alone in the early mornings when no one was watching, because that was how she cleaned regardless of whether anyone was watching. "I appreciate the offer," she said, "and I want to say yes. But I need to ask you something first, and I need an honest answer." "Ask," Walter said. "Are you offering me this because I'm genuinely the right person for it? Or because what happened here needs to be corrected, and I'm the most convenient correction?" Walter met her eyes without pause. "Both things are true," he said. "I don't believe they cancel each other out. You were wronged here, and that wrong needs to be addressed. You are also the right person for this role, and that would be true regardless of whether the wrong had occurred. The question is whether you believe that last part, not whether I do." She sat with that. The light on the table did not move. The building was too still this hour for the light to move perceptibly. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned for 30 years and had been excellent at it and had been paid accordingly, which is to say, not enough, and who had never been offered a room like this one or a conversation like this one, and who had taught her daughter everything she knew anyway, because that was who she was. Because the knowledge was worth passing on, regardless of whether anyone was looking. "I believe it," Maya said. "Good," Walter said. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me," he said. She told him. Carmen Stay's 11 years of institutional knowledge was not a replaceable asset, and she wanted it protected formally. The 6 rooms on 11 with the degraded shower seals get repaired this month, not deferred to next quarter. The replacement linen supply chain gets audited because the overwashing cycle was destroying inventory at a rate that would cost more to replace than fixing the supply lag would have cost to begin with. The housekeeping rotation gets rebuilt around actual cleaning cycles, not optics, and the cafeteria coffee on the basement level gets replaced with something that qualified as coffee. Walter looked at her for a moment, and the shadow that had been near his face throughout the morning became the real thing. A smile that arrived without announcement and was genuine in the specific way of expressions that have been earned rather than performed. "Those are reasonable conditions," he said. "All of them?" "Then yes," Maya said. Walter nodded once. James appeared in the doorway, and Walter told him to note the conditions as action items with owners and timelines, and James wrote without asking for clarification on any of it, which suggested he was accustomed to working from clarity. Then Walter looked at Maya again. "Can I ask you one thing?" "Yes." "On the 14th floor, when you knelt down and started cleaning, did you have any sense that it would matter? Beyond the grout?" Maya thought about it honestly, the way she thought about things she wanted to answer correctly. "No," she said. The corner was dirty, and you needed help, and I had 4 minutes." She paused. "That was everything it was." "That's what I thought," Walter said, and the smile held. They shook hands across the table, and Maya felt the firmness of it. Not the symbolic firmness of ceremony, but the practical firmness of 2 people agreeing on something real. An hour later, Maya walked into the staff cafeteria on the basement level. The same cafeteria where she had eaten overnight dinners during the basement rotation. The one near the mechanical room. The one with the bad fluorescent light over the corner table that nobody in management had ever thought to replace, because it was in a part of the building that management did not generally visit. Walter was already there, at that corner table, with 2 coffees from the machine that produced coffee in the technical sense of the word. She sat across from him. "This is terrible coffee," she said. "It has been terrible for approximately 6 years," he said. "It's on the list." "How long is the list?" "Long," he said. "It gets longer every quarter. Some items come off, new ones go on." The basement cafeteria coffee has survived 6 consecutive quarters, which tells you something about whose comfort the list has historically been organized around. He picked up his cup. "That changes." Maya drank the terrible coffee and looked at the corner table and the bad fluorescent light and the industrial shelving visible through the doorway to the staging area, and felt the strangeness of sitting in a place she had cleaned and eaten in and thought in, and now was going to be responsible for in a different way. Not the responsibility of maintaining it, but the responsibility of seeing it clearly and saying what she saw. "My father built the first hotel in this chain," Walter said without being asked, in the way of someone who has decided that a thing is worth saying and that the time for it is now. "Not this one. The first one, in Charleston, in 1974. 30 rooms. He built it himself, mostly. The structure, the plumbing. He cleaned it himself for the first 2 years. Every room, before the guests woke up. Every morning. He held the cup in both hands. He said you couldn't know what you were giving people if you didn't know what it felt like to care for it. He meant physically. He meant actually getting on your hands and knees and caring for it. Maya thought about her mother in the apartment buildings on the west side, cleaning hallways in buildings where they didn't even live because the super was getting old and somebody had to, and her mother had decided the somebody was going to be her, the residents knowing her name. The small things left outside doors, a jar of tamales in December, a bag of mangoes in summer, the quiet material acknowledgement that this person was the reason the building felt like something someone had loved. She would have understood that, Maya said. I know, Walter said. I can tell. They sat for a while in the way people sit when the conversation has arrived somewhere and doesn't need to be pushed further. The mechanical room hummed its steady note through the wall. The laundry facility started its morning run somewhere down the corridor. The building went on being the building, carrying everything that had happened inside it with the impartial permanence of structure, the good and the bad, the careful and the careless, the 4 minutes on a 14th floor hallway, and the 9 days of a man watching to see what this place actually was. I want to ask you something else, Maya said, and you don't have to answer. Ask. The thermos in the freight staging area, the questions about the vendor contract before I had connected it myself, coming to the mechanical room night after night. She looked at him. Was any of it accidental? Walter was quiet for a moment. I go to the mechanical rooms because I go to the mechanical rooms, he said. I had extra coffee because I always make too much. Those things were not engineered. He paused. But once I understood what you could see in this building and how you saw it, yes, I kept showing up. I wanted to understand more. And I want to be honest with you about that, because I think you've earned the honesty. There is a version of that which was not entirely fair, because I was not being entirely transparent about who I was. And I decided that the conversations themselves had been honest ones. I told you nothing false. I offered you less than everything, which is not the same as deception, but it is a distinction that deserves to be acknowledged rather than glossed over. He looked at her steadily. Does that sit right with you? She thought about it in the real way, not the polite way. Yes, she said. It does. Good, he said, because I'm going to need someone in this building who will tell me when it doesn't. Maya finished the terrible coffee. She would fix the coffee. She would fix the shower seals and the linen supply chain and the rotation schedule and the institutional habit of performing quality rather than producing it. She would do it the way her mother had done everything, with precision and without waiting for acknowledgement, because the work was the thing, and the work was enough. And also, she was beginning to understand, in the particular way that understanding arrives not as information, but as the settling of something that was always already true. The work was more than enough when you did it in a place that had finally developed the eyes to see it. She thought about the 14th floor hallway, the grout corner, the 4 minutes. The specific arithmetic of a decision that had not felt like a decision at the time, just a reflex, just the next obvious thing, just the habit of stopping when something needed doing, regardless of whether it was your list. She thought about how that moment had led, through a chain of events she could not have predicted and would not have chosen, to this table, this conversation, this folder full of timestamps that had turned out to be the most important documents in a building full of documents. She thought about what it meant that the most consequential thing she had done in 7 months at this hotel was something she had done in 4 minutes without thinking about it, when nobody important was watching. There is a kind of person who walks into a building and sees the lobby, the surfaces, the impression, the image that has been constructed for their benefit. There is another kind who sees the room, their specific room, their experience, the transaction they came to complete. And then there is the kind who sees the grout, who sees the pressure gauge sitting 8 degrees off, who sees the corner that nobody has gotten to in 3 weeks and gets low enough to reach it. That last kind of seeing is not glamorous. It does not photograph well. It does not appear in the quarterly report, or the guest satisfaction summary, or the awards ceremony photograph on a small office wall. But it is, in the end, what holds everything else together. The invisible work that makes the visible work possible. The foundation that allows the beautiful surfaces to remain beautiful. The care that the building absorbs and carries forward, and eventually, if you are paying attention, gives back. Dignity isn't something a title gives you. It's the quiet choice you make when no one important is watching. And sometimes, the most important person in the room is the one everyone decided didn't matter.